From its discovery in 1494, the island of Jamaica has been plagued by misfortune. First colonized by the Spanish and then the British, Jamaica's original tribes, known as the Tano people, were enslaved and virtually eradicated by disease and harsh manual labor. This unsettling practice would continue with the transatlantic slave trade, where more than 1.2 million people from Africa were forced to make the treacherous journey across the sea, being brought to Jamaica. Once under complete British control, the island became a major market for the slave trade and the production of sugar, but the dense forests and mountains proved to be a major problem for England. Escaped slaves would make their way into the mountains, and the British, being unaccustomed to the terrain, made pursuing them almost impossible. Formerly enslaved communities known as the Maroons would first start popping up within the Blue Mountain region. Notable leaders like Nanny of the Windward Maroons carried out guerrilla warfare against English settlers, terrorizing convoys and plantations in which they liberated thousands of more people. These Maroon tribes were the first step towards Jamaica, forming its own identity separate from colonial rule. The British Empire abolished slavery in 1834, but Jamaica's ruling majority continued to suppress independent black communities, which gave rise to an ideology known as black nationalism, a movement that promoted unity between black communities, believing that securing wealth and remaining separate from the ruling white class would earn them equality. This ideology was championed by activists like Marcus Garvey, who's considered to be Jamaica's first national hero. The Rastafarian movement would soon follow, which is an Afrocentric religion that took form in Jamaica during the 1930s, which is the belief that Haile Selassie I, Emperor of Ethiopia, fulfilled a biblical prophecy proclaiming Africa as the true Holy Land. During this time, the followers of this movement typically lived in royal communities and placed an emphasis on herbal medicine, which was a generational skill handed down from their ancestors. With these two ideologies forming, Jamaica's identity was starting to take hold. Two cousins formed opposing political parties. One was Alexander Bustamante, who led the Jamaican Labour Party, which would later become the country's Conservative Party. They promoted free markets, meaning the price of goods and services depended on supply and demand, which encouraged foreign trade and less government intervention. The other cousin was Norman Manley, who created the People's National Party. They pushed for more social services and government control within the economy to help reconsolidate funds for the people. In the 1940s, Bustamante encouraged violence against PMP supporters, claiming them to be communists. This increased tension between both parties and marked the beginnings to the conflict. In 1962, after 300 years of colonial rule, Jamaica gained full independence. After winning the election, the JLP took power. Bustamante pushed to gain closer ties to the United States, while the PMP built a relationship with Cuba. This added more political rifts as both sides accused the other of being controlled by foreign elements. Both parties began funding groups of disenfranchised youth to carry out turf wars on the streets of Kingston. In 1965, while the JLP was still in power, they tore down a PMP-controlled area in the city, constructing Tivoli Gardens in its place. The JLP armed and funded vigilante gangs within the neighborhood, solidifying it as a JLP garrison. The PMP responded by forming their own garrisons within Kingston, which placed these communities under constant threat of politically motivated violence. Alexander Bustamante and Norman Manley both passed away in the later half of the 1960s. Norman Manley's son, Michael Manley, became the leader of the PMP, going on to win the 1972 election. He publicly supported Fidel Castro and looked to strengthen ties with Cuba under new foreign policy. The JLP, under the guidance of their new leader, Edward Seaga, now became a right-wing alternative to the emerging left taking hold in the country. It's also alleged that the CIA funded the JLP and supplied numerous garrisons with weapons to destabilize the country. Leading up to the 1976 election, Bob Marley pushed for peace and solidarity and refused to align with either political party. His message of unity resonated with people, and Bob Marley became idolized for his thought-provoking lyrics and unfiltered opinion on the ongoing conflict. Both parties, looking for an advantage, hoped to gain Bob Marley's endorsement. but Bob remained stubborn in his beliefs, maintaining neutrality. Regardless, Michael Manley claimed to have Bob Marley's support, and the JLP looked to retaliate. On December 3, 1976, members of the Tivoli Gardens Phoenix gang raided Bob Marley's compound in Trenchtown. The perpetrators riddled his house with bullets, and Bob Marley was hit in the chest and arm. His wife Rita Marley was hit in the head, but her thick dreads were able to block the bullet. 2 others were wounded, but remarkably, everybody would survive this incident. This led to the historic moment where Bob Marley performed 2 days later in Kingston. He did the unthinkable, bringing Edward Seaga and Michael Manley together on stage. This was a tense moment between the 2 political leaders, considering the 1976 election seen more than 100 people perish in political conflict. The PNP would end up winning and would start forming paramilitary divisions. In 1978, a covert operation seen 5 JLP sympathizers abducted and executed by Jamaican Defense Forces. That same year, Claude Mosap, the leader of the Phoenix gang within Tivoli Gardens, lost his life in an altercation with police. It's said that this was in retaliation for the attack on Bob Marley years earlier. Another high-ranking member in the Phoenix gang, known as Lester Coke, would take control of the Tivoli Gardens, forming the infamous Shower Posse. This organization would become a unified coalition of gangs determined to see the JLP come to power. In 1980, Edward Seaga won the election, but political tensions skyrocketed, with nearly 900 people perishing leading up to the vote. Lester Coke's criminal network helped fund Seaga's campaign. They pressured and harassed PNP neighborhoods from voting, with this being the biggest landslide victory in the history of Jamaica. And while the JLP held office, the Shower Posse operated with complete immunity as they began importing weapons and narcotics to other countries. The Shower Posse set up operations within the United States and Canada, with the CIA allegedly supplying them with firearms and transportation. This was in hopes that the Shower Posse would continue to grow their network and keep the JLP in office. Edward Seaga temporarily stabilized the economy by printing more currency, but this eventually backfired as it caused a period of hyperinflation, seeing the Jamaican dollar decrease in value significantly. Seaga also cut social services and cracked down on the Shower Posse's competition, locking up dozens of criminals in a campaign to make Kingston streets safer. All the meanwhile, Lester Coke poured money into the Tivoli Gardens community, turning it from a sprawling ghetto into a modest neighborhood. But with the economy struggling and the Shower Posse having complete control of the streets, this led to other communities to become even more impoverished. Because of this, in 1984, a JLP-controlled community known as Rima threatened to switch allegiance to the PNP. Lester Coke, infuriated by these claims, sent a crew to give them a response. 8 men lost their lives in retaliation to these threats, forcing the Rima community to switch sides to the PNP. Kenneth Black, another crime lord who led a rival faction known as the Spanglers posse, looked to escape police crackdowns due to this situation. He expanded his operations into Miami. The only problem was that the Shower Posse was looking to do the very same thing, and it just so happened that Kenneth Black and Lester Coke set up shop in the same neighborhood of Miami Gardens. Both men tried to escape the public outcry from the Rima incident, but coincidentally ended up battling over turf lines in Miami, and by extension brought Jamaica's political conflict onto US soil. This was a massive problem for Edward Seaga, as he had cut ties with Cuba and was maintaining a strong relationship with the US. The Shower Posse, who funded Seaga's career, were now the same ones putting it at risk. In 1987, the Jamaican government stated that Lester Coke was wanted in connection to the Rima incident. The United States extradited Lester back to Jamaica, where the charges were immediately dropped. The JLP informed Lester Coke to remain under the radar, as it would jeopardize Seaga's position. But Lester was anything but low-key and did the exact opposite. While driving around Kingston, Lester Coke, in a fit of rage, ended the life of a school bus driver, turning the city upside down. The police tried to cover up the situation, but the public were outraged. Bus drivers went on strike until he was arrested. and Kingston was now at a complete standstill until their terms were met. With the public becoming more frustrated, Seaga was now forced into a dilemma. If he were to arrest Lester Coke now, it would prove that the JLP had never held him after his return from the United States, but Seaga folded and eventually put Lester Coke behind bars. But tensions with the states still increased, because in 1988, more than 100 members of the Shower Posse were arrested in New Jersey and Miami. They began to flip on Lester Coke's organization, and the United States government wanted him to face these charges on US soil. Seaga denied the extradition, but the US government knew that Lester Coke would never face charges in Jamaica. The United States then threatened sanctions, which would have put further strain on Jamaica's economy. But in 1989, the PNP leader Michael Manley was re-elected, placing Lester Coke's life at the mercy of his enemies. In 1992, Manley ordered for Lester Coke to be extradited to the United States. Lester, knowing that his time was up, appointed his son, Alexander Coke, to be the new leader of the Shower Posse. But in a strange turn of events, Lester Coke and his son mysteriously perished in the same day. Alexander's body was found on the outskirts of the Tivoli Gardens, while Lester Coke's jail cell caught on fire in a freak accident. Within hours, the Shower Posse's hierarchy had been destroyed, leading to another power struggle. But this wouldn't last long, as Lester Coke had another son who had been sent away in secret as a child, and he now looked to seize control of his father's legacy. This would be Christopher Coke, otherwise known as Dudus. Jamaica had seen many crime lords, but not quite like him. He was sent to the best private school in Kingston, and later earned a degree as a civil engineer. Dudus was regarded as a well-spoken genius even before he became the leader of the Shower Posse. With Dudus in control, he would take the Shower Posse to even greater heights. He was more secretive and organized. He would restructure the organization this time around, all while maintaining a level of ruthlessness unmatched by any other posse. Leading to the 2002 elections, the streets erupted into chaos as vast criminal networks with political backing battled it out over control for more territory for their political factions. Dudus, like his father, looked to put the JLP back in office. He funded Bruce Golding's campaign in 2007 to help bring reform back to the country. After Golding won, Christopher Coke's construction company was chosen for a $33 million contract to rebuild the Tivoli Gardens. Dudus was now one of the richest men in Kingston. With this came immense power, and he was nothing but generous with his wealth. Even today, Christopher Coke is idolized by many communities in Kingston. He paid out of pocket for kids to go to school and refix broken neighborhoods. As he continued to grow, he would set up operations in New York City. The city seen a surge in violence as Shower Posse subsets battled for control of new turf lines. Local police began investigating Shower Posse members, and in 2010, while in New York, Dudus was caught on a wiretap, laying out details of numerous crimes carried out by his organization. Dudus was tipped off that the police were onto him and fled back to Jamaica, with the United States pressuring Bruce Golding for his extradition. Now Golding was in a similar situation faced by Edward Seaga. Does he remain loyal to the man who put him in office, or does he fold to the United States to manage economical strain? Except this time around, Dudus had the favor of his supporters. Golding refused the extradition for nearly a year until he folded and ordered for the arrest of Christopher Coke. Thousands of Shower Posse sympathizers surrounded the Tivoli Gardens to deter police from carrying out the arrest. On May 23, 2010, Shower Posse members attacked 2 police stations and burnt them down to the ground. The next day, Bruce Golding placed Kingston in a state of emergency, deploying the army to stop the situation. The Tivoli Gardens erupted into urban combat for 3 days as the army looked to break through the Shower Posse's defenses. The fighting would conclude on May 27th, as Dudus would try to slip through the army's defenses. He did this by trying to dress up as a woman, wearing a wig and a dress. This disguise was almost immediately discovered, with the police swarming Christopher Coke and placing him in their custody. When the smoke cleared, 74 people had perished in the fighting. In 2013, the United States sentenced Christopher Dudus Coke to 23 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole in 2030. I wish I could say that this conflict slowed down in recent years, but unfortunately, this isn't the case. Starting in 2019, Jamaica has consistently seen more than 1,000 homicides a year. With a population of only 2.8 million people, this made it the most dangerous country throughout the Caribbean and Latin America. The ongoing conflict will always be reignited with a new generation of street gangs continuing the tradition of a violent struggle. Garrisons have spread throughout the entire country, and the Spangler and Shower Posse are very much still active. Elements of the Shower Posse still remain within Toronto and Philadelphia. They have proven to have a large criminal network that will be hard to topple, but that will be a story for another day. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this story. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, as it's always greatly appreciated. If you have any suggestions, don't forget to leave them down below. So with all that being said guys, I'll see you down in the comments.